Welcome to the Poetry Exchange. I'm Fiona Bennett, and this is when you would usually hear another voice saying, and I'm Michael Schaefer. Michael is away and busy with some acting work at the moment. If you were listening to the last episode, you'll have heard that update. He's appearing in a play at the Orange Tree Theatre, and he's busy there tonight as I record this. So we'll let him get on with that, and I shall talk to you alone, which is wonderful, actually. It's rather nice to have not that obviously I'm missing him, but it's really nice to have the chance to be able to maybe use this little bit of time with you to share a few thoughts and a few, hopefully, some useful things to share. The first of those relates to Michael, actually, in that I've discovered that there is actually a live stream of the play that he's in, Tom Fool, which is at the Orange Tree Theatre in Richmond. But if you're not in London and you'd be interested to see it, you should be able to, if they haven't sold out already, get yourself a live stream ticket for April the 7th, I think it is. So take a look at the website there for details on that. I'm sure world events are very much on everyone's mind, and there are lots of ways that I know people have been getting involved and finding ways to donate and to support and stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. And I just wanted to mention that I know there's an event coming up on March the 27th, Poets for Ukraine, which is being held both as a live event and an online one as a fundraiser to get vital supplies to people there. And I think the best way to find out more about that, it's kind of under the banner of Poets for Ukraine. And if you go to the GoFundMe website, you'll be able to find a way to make a donation and also information about getting the link for the event itself. So it's a poemathon. That's to be more specific, which basically means there's a fantastic community of poets who've come together and who will be reading alongside one another, a host of terrific poets. So a chance to hear some great voices and some great words, and to also be in community and solidarity and to raise some funds. So March the 27th, Poets for Ukraine, GoFundMe website will give you the information. It's wonderful to be able to bring another conversation from our time at the National Centre for Writing in Norwich back in the autumn. And this was one that was extremely moving and uplifting and really captured our day when we spent time with our guest. And so we've been wanting to share it with you, and it actually just feels that now is exactly the right moment to share this poem and this conversation. And it does in fact feature a poem that we have featured before on, in fact, 2 other episodes, and I will say a bit more about that afterwards. But it says something for the poem, of course, and also the power of poetry to reach us in many different ways, that this was a really significant conversation and one that resonated with the others, but also very much stands in its own space. So you'll be listening to myself and Michael talking about The Lake Isle of Innisfree by W.B. Yeats, the poem that's been a friend to Sue. She's got a whole folder and everything. How amazing.
Thank you so much.
It's been... Now, I know it's been done... You've done it at least once, maybe more. I don't know.
Sue asked me the question. She said, does it matter if it's been done before? And I said...
No.
Absolutely not at all.
Definitely not.
Because it's not been done by you.
Exactly.
And that's how I came to it, was through a poetry exchange.
Is that right?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, well, this is good. This is already
maybe
exciting.
three years ago, something like that.
Lovely. Will you give it a read for us, Sue?
Yes. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made, 9 bean rows will I have there, a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always night and day I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, I hear it in the deep heart's core. Mm-hmm. Do you know what? I'm going to get some tissues. I'm going to say now, I've been thinking about this, because this poem just makes me really emotional, so I might just need a little
have
dab.
them to hand. Yeah. Any one of us might need them.
A little tissue.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure one will be fine. I'm not going to have a complete meltdown.
No, but it's so that's interesting, because you said that you did you first encounter it through the Poetry Exchange?
Yes, I'd never seen the poem before.
Okay, great.
And this one just jumped out at me, literally stopped me in my tracks. And in fact, I pretty much immediately went and kind of copied the poem out, because I wanted to have it printed out in front of me so that I could read it. Never done that with a poem before.
Why did it leap out at you? What is it about it?
Just every single word feels just perfectly chosen and perfectly placed. And it was that sense of sanctuary that I felt the poem created so beautifully. And I, at the time, was working as a civil funeral celebrant. And so for me, there's a kind of complicated but beautiful connection between a place of sanctuary and death and nature and life that's wrapped up in this poem in some way. It was about having a beautiful, safe space to go to. And you see, I said I'd get tearful. I don't know why. And I think it's because it's just so beautiful.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for giving us that context of relationship with it.
I was actually going to ask if you could just maybe tell us a little bit more about that. I think I have a sense of what that is, but I'm not entirely clear on it. A civil funeral celebrant, is that?
Yes, so it's not quite the same as a humanist celebrant, which is something perhaps people might be more familiar with. So I conduct a funeral ceremony that is not religious, but it's not exclusive of religious references. I kind of sit between what a vicar or a priest might do and a humanist, but I go and spend time with the family or whoever is arranging the service. It's not always a family member, and find out about the person that's died, find out what they want for the service, and then write the ceremony from beginning to end. So there are no set words, no fixed phrases that I have to use. There are no rules whatsoever. It's all about what's right for that person and that family.
What a thing to do.
I absolutely love it with a passion, and I feel extraordinarily privileged when I'm doing that work. And it brings me very close to death, and yet it's all about the people that are living as well.
Really beautiful. Is it too much of a stretch to kind of equate the safe space that you've spoken about in the poem, and there is a literal space here of the small cabin, with the safe space that you're creating in your work as a celebrant?
That's interesting. I perhaps think so. I think the cabin feels so personal here, because the poet talks about not finding a cabin by the lake, but building a cabin and creating it. And so perhaps that is something that I do, is create that safe space. But I think for me it is important in this poem that there is that building of a small cabin and planting the beans and looking after the hive with the bees. So it's not a safe space where nothing is happening, but it's very purposeful toil that is at the same time peaceful and deeply personal.
Yes, that beautiful mix of something being alive and vibrant and peaceful. It's not a still piece. There's movement and there's nourishment going on in there as well, isn't there?
Yes, and I think the line that kind of really gets me is that one, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. That sound of bees and being in a beautiful place.
I've always had that a kind of response to that line, but I haven't quite before had that real connection to it being, where the acoustic changes because you are separated somehow. But you're making this extraordinary connection that there's this sort of separating element that is part of what happens at death, obviously,
Well, the strange thing is that almost all my life I've been really afraid of death, kind of consciously afraid of death, in something that I've thought about and found really, really difficult and been very fearful. And actually, this poem helps me to reconcile that in some way. And funnily enough, doing this work as a civil funeral celebrant, because often people say, oh, isn't that a bit depressing? Isn't that, funerals, it's difficult. And I've never found that difficult in terms of my relationship with death. And it's actually doing that work has really moved my thinking on and helped me kind of become more at peace with the idea of death than I ever thought I would be. And this poem has been a really powerful part of that.
It always slightly takes me by surprise, the last two lines of the poem. While I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, I hear it in the deep heart's core. That I always go, he's not actually, he's saying all of this stuff, I'm saying it's he, from the position of someone that's not there, but he's in the city somewhere, or so he's creating, I hear it in the deep heart's core, that space for the person is inside of them.
Exactly, and that's why I just find it so emotional, and I think I used that word serenity earlier. So it is all, for me, it's all about that. And I think for me there've been many times in my life where I've needed to find that inner peace somehow. Oh dear. Just because everything that's going on outside is so kind of crazy. And so to just kind of reach inside and find that stillness.
It's okay.
And people do that through meditation often, don't they? I've tried that. I'm not very good at that. But I have, I think that last verse, those last four lines, there's something in there for me that is almost like the sound that I hear is almost like a ticking clock. So that I hear lake water lapping, that I imagine that as a repetitive sound that is almost like the sound of time passing or a ticking clock. And so there is a kind of inevitability about this poem in some way for me. There is an inevitability about death, and these last few lines are kind of acknowledging that you might not be in this bee-loud glade in your cabin now, but actually it can be there for you when you need it.
Yeah.
There's a kind of there's a power in this poem to invoke it. You know, I will arise and go now. I wonder if that's part of why it's so moving for you as well, is that it's saying you can take this up if you want to. It's got agency.
Yes, and that's why when I first read the poem, I immediately had to print it out because I wanted it physically available to me to read and to, as a reminder of exactly that. And although I only came to this poem relatively recently, I just have this sense that it's always been there, and there's a sense that I can kind of apply it retrospectively. And yes, that feeling of choice that's there right in that first line of making a decision that I'm going to go now to this place is really important. And I guess I wanted that reminder that I can have this place.
Yes, the reminder to you that you can have it, and the actual embodiment of it. You know, the printing off is also going, it's present, it's here, you know, it's not difficult to reach for in a way.
You've spoken a little bit about how this has changed the way you think about death.
Yes.
I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about maybe that and maybe other ways in which the experience of doing this work has changed you, impacted upon you, affected you.
So however difficult the circumstances might have been around somebody's death, and I've found it very thought-provoking, quite challenging at times, but never depressing, they never make me feel afraid being in those circumstances with a family, because I feel my responsibility to them overrides that. But afterwards and kind of cumulatively, the reflections about people's lives, the way other people think about someone that has died, I suppose has made me think more about my relationships and what kind of person I am, what kind of thing people will remember me for. You know, what am I leaving behind? Does it matter if I don't leave anything? So thinking about those things, but I feel I can think about those things in a kind of calm way without a sort of panic or fear driving those, and just kind of consider those questions.
And to be able to think about it.
Yes.
As opposed to react to the fear of it, which again takes me back to the poem of I will arise and go now, and this willingness to look into something that's part of our life is our death.
Yes.
You know? Yeah, it's a big area. We're not just in a big area personally about life and death. It's culturally, I'm very interested in the way you're speaking and what you're bringing in holding these ceremonies in the way that you do. I'm sure you're doing something extremely distinctive in terms of what's available culturally for people.
Well, I'm constrained actually by the length of time that's available. So one of the challenges for anybody conducting a funeral service or ceremony in a typical crematorium is the length of time, and often it's 25 minutes, which is such a short time. And part of what my job is to create the sense that we have all the time in the world in that room, and to say everything that needs to be said. And that I enjoy that challenge. But I think what I said in the earlier about the poem, for me, that lake water lapping, that kind of repetitive, gentle sound is something to me about time. And I would love that to change. I would love to be able to say to families, well, how long do we think we need? And we'll craft the ceremony around that. Or, you know, what do you want to do and say and hear and think? And we'll create the time for that to happen. I think there is a revolution in the funeral industry that could happen in terms of people understanding that actually there are no rules, really, well, very, very few rules about how you have a funeral. So if you want to have a funeral in a garden or in a village hall and put the coffin that you've made yourself in the back of a van and take it to that place and have a kind of party for 3 hours, if that's what you want to do, there's no law that says you can't. But people don't really realise that, and we don't have that culture here. So there is something about our traditions here, very, very fixed, about how we handle death and how we have funerals. They've kind of evolved with that kind of Western Christian tradition, and there is room for change.
So tell me, have you ever thought about making this space a real space for yourself? Have you ever thought about,
A cabin.
The cabin? I mean, I think about it all the time. It's really, I suppose, why I'm asking. This poem is a friend to me. I've been introduced to lots of friends through this process, but this one very much so. And when I have a van instead of a cabin. But one of the things that I particularly love about going out in my van is being out in nature and listening. And this line comes to me in these moments about peace comes dropping slow, and I feel it in my body. I feel peace come dropping slow within my body, and often it's through the act of listening. And so I'm always fantasising about having the cabin. Do you ever actually think about making it a real space for yourself?
Yes and no. So my husband and I are thinking about moving, selling a house. My husband is a real kind of country man. He's very, Suffolk stock, and wants to have his little place with some land, having a bit of land on which he can have animals is really important to him, and he's not many years away from retiring, and so that's an active conversation about having that space. And actually, probably for both of us, the actual property is not that important. What's more important is where it is and the land around it. So we'd be quite content with a very small, humble property, maybe a cabin. We're not that interested in the sort of material, fancy kitchens and 5 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms, all that kind of thing. We'd be happy with a humble place with maybe a couple of acres of land in which to play with nature. So that's interesting. I hadn't made that connection before. I think the other thing to say, the reason I said yes and no was, the other thing is that I do consciously, as much as I can, enjoy those little moments throughout my week. I walk a dog most days, if not every day. I do consciously make the effort to just stop and look and listen, and even if it's just for 20 seconds, and just to allow that, maybe it is that peace dropping slow in every day as much as I can. So it's not necessarily about the physical place, but it's about reaching in and finding that stillness through a connection with nature.
The Lake Isle of Innisfree. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there, of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, and a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the cricket sings. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. I will arise and go now, for always, night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore, while I stand on the roadway or on the pavements grey. I hear it in the deep heart's core. So that was the gift reading of The Lake Isle of Innisfree by W.B. Yeats. Our thanks to W.B. Yeats for that poem. It is just, it's such a powerful piece, and it's actually wonderful to be able to share the poem with that line, for peace comes dropping slow, and to be putting that out at the moment feels very, very, very timely, I suppose, in its own way. Our enormous thanks to Sue for the conversation with so many deep and rich dimensions that were very particular and personal to her journey in her life, and which I'm sure also resonated with many of you as it did with Michael and I when we spent time with her. So I would also say, if you haven't yet heard either of the other episodes that feature the Lake Isle, then do head there and find them. And actually, it's going to be easy for you to do that, to go and find those other 2 episodes featuring the poem, because we now have our episodes numbered. So episode 9 and episode 26, 2 very different conversations about the Lake Isle of Innisfree, if you want to get some more of that poem and some different perspectives. So it would be a good time of the year to think about getting yourself some extra poetry books on your shelves, and I have got 2 to recommend. I've done that sort of advance booking of book on 2 fantastic poetry volumes coming out in April and May that I thought I'd just offer up to you before I go. And the first of those is the new collection coming from Paul Henry called As If to Sing. What a beautiful title. Being published by Seren Books. And Paul is a fantastic poet. I'm sure many of you might know him. If you do, then you're going to want his latest collection. If you haven't yet met his work, I'm sure this is going to be a wonderful place to start. So head to Seren Books to get yourselves a copy of As If to Sing. And actually the other book I was going to mention is coming out in May, so I'll leave that till next time. So there you go, that's a teaser to join us again next month for more Poems as Friends. Until then, thank you for listening.